Bitcoin exists to split when you disagree with new thing.
Sure.
There shouldn't be new thing. Bitcoin is the thing. And if hard money can change, then it is soft money. And if it's soft money, if there is anybody who can change it, then you've immediately introduced the opportunity for political factions. And if you add political factions, you add lobbyists and people who have interest. And okay, well, if it can change, maybe I can change it to benefit me. And everybody will say, well, no, the Bitcoin community will never allow such a thing. I'd argue you allow it all the time. I'm the Bitcoin community, and I hate this thing that you've done. And I have zero practical response as a Bitcoiner to reject you. You tell me that I just don't get it. I'm not technical enough. I'm, all these other things.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Stackin Sats, presented by Force-Based Mining. I am your host, Plamenko. Today, I'll be speaking with Wuckert Jr. Kurt has a lot of differing opinions than most people do on Bitcoin. He believes that BTC is not Bitcoin. He believes that Wright is Satoshi. But besides the point, we got into the studio, we had a good conversation, and we spoke about some potential vulnerabilities and criticisms of Bitcoin that I think are valid. I think whenever you're learning about something new, you should always keep your mind open, and you should try to form your best view as rationally as possible. That can come from all kinds of perspectives, and that's really what this conversation here is about today. As always, this is not financial advice. Please enjoy my conversation with Wuckert Jr. I really do appreciate having you up here. It's the Stackin Sats podcast presented by Force-Based Mining, and I'm super happy to have you on here, Kurt. This is our first time meeting as well.
Yes.
Which is always interesting when you're going to go and record, an intimate conversation with someone and you just met them. So I really appreciate your braveness there too, just joining me and having this conversation. Sure. I guess, we're a Bitcoin podcast, so I always like to know a little bit about kind of people's background. How did you get into Bitcoin? What intrigued you at first and all that?
Mm-hmm. So I've been a libertarian for a very long time, since like high school. I'm 38 years old. And as a youngster, to me, like the government, money, and like monetary policy, like I was a gold advocate when I was like 16. So my view on money and fiat money, like I had a pretty like when I first heard Ron Paul in 2008, I was like instantly like, that guy gets it, So I was a Ron Paul volunteer 2008 and 2012. And so I just knew a lot of people. I was the guy who would go to the local parade and hand out a basic, hey, do you know who Ron Paul is? Do you know about sound money? Do you know why the Federal Reserve does what it does, And so I met some people. I also owned a printing company at the time. And I met a guy who basically asked if I could print him some posters. And he asked if he could pay me in Bitcoin. And I didn't know what Bitcoin was because it was 2012. And he tells me it's like video game money. So I was like, well, which video game? He's like, well, it's not a video game money. It's just like video game money. You can spend it in the digital space. Like, hey, okay, whatever. So it was a small job, so it was like not a huge commitment for me to accept like $150 of video game money for a guy that I basically liked anyways. So it was like, sure. Yeah, sure. Set me up, pay me in Bitcoin. And then I just kind of sat on it. I didn't do anything else with it for a while. And then my brother's like 4.5 years younger than me, got a job offer to work for a big libertarian podcaster named Adam Kokesh. And Adam had a show called Adam versus the Man, and it was nothing but him doing like peaceful resistance kind of stuff, like taking really stupid laws that exist in places and then breaking them with a camera on. So like you're not allowed to dance at the Lincoln Memorial, if I recall, is like a thing that's posted. Like it is against federal law to dance at the Lincoln Memorial. And so he goes and dances at the Lincoln Memorial and gets like the park's police to arrest him and like threw him on the ground. Like they hurt him to cuff him for this thing, you know? So Adam had a very popular channel 10 years ago. Adam's still around, but he got significantly weirder over the last 10 years. But at the time, he was like a rising star. And my brother was super into internet marketing and social media management. And Adam offered him like, hey, Carl, I'd like you to be my social media guy. I think you're really cool. And but the caveat is I would like to pay you in Bitcoin. And so that was the second time I heard Bitcoin was from Adam, who was a guy who I respected and thought was an interesting character. And I was like, okay, I guess I need to look into what this actually is, because now I've heard it twice. And so then I just kind of fell down the rabbit hole. It was like, okay, read the white paper, like Google around. I remember watching videos of like Roger Ver and Andreas Antonopoulos and like the kind of basic what is Bitcoin conversational content. And I just was like, oh my God, like this is it. Maybe I'm not a gold bug anymore. Maybe this could be money and all these, you know, other like revelatory things that people go through when they first learn about Bitcoin. And from there, it was like, oh wow, the creator's gone and like all this other like mystery and intrigue stuff. And so it was like, man, this is like a spy novel wrapped in all this stuff that I really care about.
Yeah.
And so I didn't even know, like really like the next 9 months of my life just kind of immersed in all my free time. Like I'm going to join every Bitcoin group on Facebook, and I'm going to join I'm going to get into the Reddit, and I got a Bitcoin Talk account and like all these things. And so just, that was it. It really, like, it kind of took over. I started mining in 2013, did a really bad job of it. Like I got GPUs, like right as ASICs were like starting to hit the market. So like when I made the purchase, I calculated, okay, I can make about this much a day. But then by the time I had them like set up, the difficulty had gone up so significantly. I was like, I'm going to do nothing but lose money. Like, did I do my math wrong? Like I thought I was like, I must have missed like 2 decimal points. What am I, an idiot? And then it was, you know, just everything that you learn going through all of that. I just was like, no, I have to figure this out. And so that's the basic start of my Bitcoin story. And I literally never, aside from like, I got married in 2015 and I took like a little break. And then 2016 is like right when the Ethereum ICO bubble and stuff started to happen. And I started getting people calling me like, hey, Kurt, you know that thing you're always talking about? Like, should I buy the, you know, like the Gollum ICO? And I'm like, what the hell is an ICO? What is Gollum? You know, like all this stuff. So all of a sudden, like all my friend circle became crypto bros. And I had to like, I was like, it's my duty. I must explain to these people why this is fraud, like why this is a scam. And it got to be so many people asking me questions that I started to flip on Facebook Live. And then I said, you know what, I'll just schedule it. I'll do it every day at noon for 10 minutes. And I'll talk about what's the news of the day. And then I'll take questions until the questions run out. And I have not stopped streaming Bitcoin at least weekly since. And so it's been 6 years of me doing Bitcoin related media. And it started with me literally just saying, Facebook Live's a thing. Like, I guess I'm live.
That's awesome.
So here I am.
No, and very much to, you know, the origins of Bitcoin, to keep it open sourced, to be willing to have these public, you know, discussions, to be someone who can also just not hold your hand, but lend a hand. You know,
yeah.
If people have questions, there's no reason to blow them off. Like if the questions are curiosity, you know, that's super cool. So it just seemed like from a very quick point in your life, you're given this task to, you know, speak about Bitcoin, kind of get people, you know, listening, get them intrigued. Were you generally finding that people were interested in what you were saying because it was something they hadn't heard? Or do you find that, like, you know, as you learned more, you got to develop like a better kind of case for it? So a little bit of a both and.
I've always kind of been like in my community. I was always like super active in my church and super active in school activities and like I was always kind of the, hey, Kurt's here. Like now, like let's have a good time doing a thing. I've always kind of just had a big personality and a pretty big friend group. And I've always been super political, and I'm always happy to engage in some crazy thing or like, hey, here's why everything you believe is a lie. And so everybody's a little bit used to me being that way. But when it came to Bitcoin, it was such a good real world example of like the free market solving a problem that I've been telling people actually existed. So like I said, I was a libertarian since I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And then, trying to tell my friend, here's why you should volunteer for the Ron Paul campaign in 2008 and then 2012. So all these issues that everybody's like, dude, I don't know what the gold standard actually, like I get what you're saying, but what does this practically mean for my life? I work at the grocery store,
Right.
And so what Bitcoin did is it gave me sort of a like, hey, see, other people agree with me. And here's this evidence that this was a problem worth solving. Mm. And so it's funny, while I would get 3 or 4 people that would engage with my like political posts, when it was Bitcoin, it was people like, well, here's why this doesn't make sense. Here's why you would want dollars, or here's why you would want gold instead of Bitcoin, or here's why you would want like here's why this doesn't work. Everybody seemed to like, because it was money. It triggered some little thing that was intangible about all of the other stuff. And so people would engage with my stuff rapidly. I mean, within a month, and in a month I had done probably 30 Facebook Lives. And the beauty of Facebook Live, I don't know if this is still the case, but when you'd click go live, every single person that you were friends with would get notified.
Right.
Kurt has just gone live. Would you like to click and watch? And I had a lot of Facebook friends. I was a very early Facebook user too. I loved social media as a concept. And so I had, thousands of people that would be like, why is Kurt live every day at 12? And it would show you, and at first it's like 5 people, but by the end of the month you have 90 people watching your show. And like, that's a lot for like just my friend group, So, and then it just kind of keeps snowballing. Like even now, like I get, like I'll be a guest on a thing and it's like, it got 30,000 views in 6 days, And it's funny because it's literally never changed. Like my narrative about Bitcoin has never shifted. Like it is X. It matters because it's X. And if you try to turn it into Y, I'm going to call you out on it. And that made me like, I was like a hero. And then it was like, Kurt's a little weird. And now it's like, Kurt's like kind of a super villain. So, and I just think it's really funny because it like, you can watch my content is still out there from 2016 and 17 and 18 and 19. And so it's funny to watch like how much the culture has shifted.
Yeah.
And at the same time, like I've become kind of infamous, and at the same time, like also really increased like my people who, are fans and friends and all of that. So it's weird. Yeah.
You are an untouchable in the BTC community.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I've spoken to a lot of people about this, and just like I'm going to interview this, BSV guy, and everyone's like, oh my God, what are you doing? Luckily I have the liberty that, this is our 9th episode.
Sure.
I'm not someone who has this giant head that's displayed, and I need to make sure that my audience, knows who I am, and I would never kind of thing.
Yeah.
I come from Bitcoin pretty late, 2020. I was working at Whole Foods during the pandemic, and I've studied, about these things here and there. Before I tell the pandemic story, going back to what you were mentioning with why people get so like upset when money is a part of the conversation. It's something my friend Matthias calls survivorship bias. Other people call it survivorship bias.
Yep.
When you make money and you do the right things and you've made this money a certain way, then you think that you know about it, or you think that this is the answer, or you're just blinded to what fiat actually is.
Yep.
If you're holding some more of it than other people.
Sure.
So definitely can see where people, all of a sudden put
Yeah.
their economist hat on. But basically, I'm working at Whole Foods. I'm working, and I'm picking up shifts in produce and wherever just because it's chaotic. There's people buying everything. And for the first time in my life, I saw scarcity in a way I'd never experienced. I had money in my account.
Yeah.
I could buy whatever I wanted, but that stuff wasn't there. It wasn't physically on the shelves. It wasn't an inventory, wherever these marketplaces, you were buying from. So that really scared me, and it really had me kind of going back to like my younger, more like doomsday zeitgeist days, where it's like you first learn about legal tender and you first learn about, banking and fractional reserve banking. And that's kind of like where it clicked for me. And it started with Ethereum, ironically.
Sure.
I watched Lex Friedman's first interview with Vitalik Buterin, and I was just like so mesmerized by the concepts they were talking about. And, lo and behold, I find myself in the industry, and I ask all these people, what do I say to someone who is like a BSV supporter? What do I say to someone who, has these viewpoints? And no one gave me a good answer. Sorry to everyone. Sorry to all my homies. Sorry to all my friends, everyone in the industry, but no one gave me a good answer. And this is something Lex Friedman talks a lot about. It's less in what questions you're answering, and it's more in the tone of how you're answering them. And I couldn't do that. It's not true to me to just completely shit on someone for something that I don't understand.
Sure.
Like I said, I'm 2020. I'm a couple years into this. I'm a newbie here.
Well, see, and that makes you special, by the way. Like, very few people ever get to the point of emotional maturity where they can have a conversation about something where maybe they disagree. Like, maybe I'm going to undermine your fundamental beliefs about something you care about.
Yeah.
But, like, that doesn't make me a bad guy. Like, I might be right. I might be telling you a very painful truth. and if it makes anything in your life better, it's worth it. I mean, even just the information is worth it. Not that, I'm not necessarily going to make you rich because I've given you some kind of like, hey, here's some free alpha or, that kind of thing. You get those guys who are like, a guru about like, here's the product of a thing. I don't care what you do with your money or your life or anything. I'm a libertarian, but the truth really matters. And so if you just give everybody the truth and let everybody make their own decisions, that's a good thing. And I get so many people, like I know there are people that are watching this right now, consuming this content as I'm saying it, saying, oh, well, Kurt's the biggest liar I've ever met, though. And it's like, no, you're triggered because my truths undermine some belief that you have.
Yeah.
Deal with it. Like, nobody cares. Like, nobody cares if you need to take a minute and think about, shoot, was I wrong about everything? Because you might be. I've been wrong about all kinds of things. We've all been wrong about all kinds of things. And the only reason we got better is because at some point we either checked our own ego or something else checked our ego for us, and we were forced to get stronger by dealing with whatever that truth was. And so I think it's very funny in the blockchain space where we're supposed to be like open-minded and, hey, we're like this revolutionary group of people that is like super visionary and like, but don't talk about all of these, like, but here's the unmentionables.
Yeah, no, so, totally. And I'm, I want to do something different, and I want to just like provide a different perspective. And part of that is, I just can't put it to me to just completely ignore something. And I'm not here saying that I believe BSV is the true Bitcoin. I'm not here saying that I think BTC is the true Bitcoin. I'm 3 years into this experience. I'm speaking with you. You're someone who has something I don't, which is you were on the internet. You were in real time while this was happening. So you got to intake media and have discussions in a way that I just can't. Now, I'm a historian at heart, so this is really hard for me because what I found in this short 13 years of a history is just the most muddled, unanswerable kind of story. It's not saying that anyone's right or wrong, but I think for only having 13 years of a history, there's not enough of a focus on these schisms. And there just seems to be this overall narrative of like Bitcoin is flawless. Bitcoin, it's this, it's that, it's hard money. It's whatever it is, everyone gives you all the answers. And those are some of the things that you pick up to learn. But what intrigues me with where you're coming from is because you're someone who also holds an idea in my head, which is that nothing is sacred. Nothing is going to withstand the truth. Nothing is going to withstand public discourse. So it's like, why not? Why don't we talk about this?
Yeah.
Just like, it's tough. It's a tough topic, and I want to come at it differently. And one thing I've seen from watching your videos and seeing your presence online is you're dubbed, I don't know if it's a self-dubbing, but you're dubbed as Kurt the Historian.
Yeah.
Is that something that you kind of, you call yourself a historian, or is it just, as you've explained things to people?
So a little bit. I mean, as an official title, like, I don't have like a PhD in history or something, but it actually kind of started as so I have a couple of groups of people in my life that some of my close friends will jokingly call me Kurtopedia because somebody will start talking about just something and I'll just start rattling off facts about it. I'll be like, oh, actually, or like I'll notice, like we'll be in a different country and I'll notice a building and I'll say, oh, hey, I read about this. And I'll go into like, did you know the Templars used this as like this was the first bank and this is all, and they're just like, Kurt, where did that come from? And I'm just like, oh, I don't know. I just I cared about that thing when I heard it, and it's still in there.
Yeah.
And so you get those people who, like my close friends, will tell you, yes, everybody calls Kurt Kurtopedia. And then when it really comes to anything, I come by this process that I want to figure out what is the most conservative version of this story and what is the most revisionist liberal version of this story. And that's for all history, right? So imagine talking about World War II. So, okay, we're taught what World War II is in the West, and, America came in and we friggin' won, and yeah, that's kind of true, but how do they teach World War II in Russia?
Right.
Because it's a very, very different thing to them. And it takes a little bit of extra work to not just have the, hey, I went to school in Chicago and was taught the American version of what World War II is. And hey, there are parts of this that are illegal to talk about if you're in Germany.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to express, unless it's very specifically regulated academic study of Nazism in Germany. Yeah. And if you start to, they can put you in jail for that. And that's their experience of World War II. That's just the result of how that shook out. And then you have Russia's version. And then there's also a Japan version. And then there's also a version from everywhere else. Let's go ask the people that lived in some country that was uninvolved. It had an effect on everybody. What does World War II look like if I went and learned it in India?
Yeah.
And it's very different. And it's the same with everything. World War II is a big event, but everything is this. This is religion. This is worldview. This is, what's a big issue now? What is a man? What is a woman? That is a huge political issue in the West right now. Yeah. And so you need to break down why has it become this? And there's deep roots to that stuff. So for me, I always try to break down everything cultural into what are its distilled simplest pieces, because that's what we're actually building on. And it just has made me obsessed with history. So because you can't understand the context of now without understanding like what about our culture is a reaction to the 2000s and the 90s and the 80s and the 70s, because it's not just in a vacuum that the world looks the way that it looks. And so I'm very much an amateur historian in many regards, but like I read constantly, I listen to tons of podcasts, and I just do it. Like as a child, I wanted to be like an archaeologist, and then I wanted to be a theologian. I'm quite religious, by the way, so for me it's like, well, if I'm going to read the Bible, I have to learn the source language. I have to read the Bible in the language that it was written, because I'm just trusting some translator from the 1500s, and how do I know he wasn't an idiot?
So you learned Aramaic, is what you're saying?
I learned Koine Greek is what I learned to read the New Testament in its source language. And so, like, that's just how I treat things. Like, if I'm going to agree to anything as like part of my identity or part of my culture, I'm not going to do it flippantly. So that's where it starts. And then when it came to like Bitcoin, I started with Satoshi. I started with, okay, here's the white paper. Here's the way that he announced it. Is there a reason why he announced it that way? Is there anything intriguing about the date or the place or the, you know? So I just read every publicly available thing that existed for Satoshi. Like, what did he say? Turns out the first like 2 years of Bitcoin was a lot of people just asking questions of Satoshi. Yeah. Hey, why is it like this? Hey, why is it like that? Here's why I think you're an idiot. Here, you know, and like watching him have a debate or watching him do these things. And so I just committed that stuff to memory. And then when it came to 2016, 2017, like scaling war drama, and I start to see the people who are like, well, Bitcoin was always supposed to be X. And I'm like, that goes against this quote that I recall. And then it would be like, oh, well, that's, you know, your context is off. And it's like, well, no, like, let's go back and read it. It should take 2 minutes to read it. And then it would be like, you're blocked.
Well, this is the religiosity of all of it. So when you're dealing with text, you know, there's so many ways that you have to go about interpreting this. I mean, depending on what kind of like a historian you are, you have different lenses, you know, that you're willing to look through, to observe the text and understand it. And I think that there's a lot of, you know, of Satoshi's writings and works that are very like on the page, clear cut,
crystal clear.
But there's also a lot of things that are interpretable. And whether it's like a conversation between him and like Mike Hearn, or something that you see Satoshi post in 2009 versus something in 2011, things happen, things change. People are supposed to change. Satoshi's a person, right? We think he's a person, you know, we think he's a person, therefore he's someone who has the right to change. Sure. So like what makes it difficult is like when you're going to like a fundamentalist viewpoint, you're interpreting the text as like literally as you can. And what, you know, some things I can surmise from that are going to be issues of context just by the fact that you're reading it at a different time than it was written.
Sure.
So like, you know, a lot of the times, like I understand the fundamentalist approach, but these are just some of the things that, you know, not talking a technical aspect of Bitcoin. It's also hard for me to then be like, you know, if these are the fundamental truths, like I just feel like always going to be forever open to interpretation and open to resistance and arguments. And it does something that I find really ironic and interesting, is that it just like shows you the humanity of Bitcoin. Like you were saying,
sure,
you're dealing with people who are post fact, post time, trying to resolve this, trying to figure it out. And I guess like that's kind of like where I see this perspective of like the change coming and the schism happening. You know, from your perspective, you know, I'll give you some time to kind of share your perspective as well.
By all means.
From your perspective, it's like this was more of like a calculated war, whereas as someone who's relatively new and like having the time to intake the information, for me, it's like a dirty war. It's a war of a lot of ego, in the sense that people had their arguments for big blocks, small blocks, and why.
Yeah.
And people were willing to crush and step on the throat of the opposition to kind of make that happen. And I guess I just want to hear your thoughts on all this.
It's a really important point to digest, actually, because, you know, a lot of people will make the point, like I will criticize like the soft fork roadmap of BTC. I think is deeply corrupt.
Can you explain why? Because a soft fork, it seems like, is like it's a soft fork. You know, we didn't change, we didn't hard fork, we didn't change, you know, and switch to a different protocol. So can you explain the soft fork issue? Let's
start by asking you a question.
Yes.
Is a soft fork a bigger change than a hard fork?
I think like...
Or is it a smaller one?
I mean, ideologically, I guess it's tough. I feel like a soft fork is almost like... It could be relative. A soft fork could change more than a hard fork, you know, or vice versa, I guess.
So in a consensus computing system, a hard fork is when a node or a group of nodes break a rule. And in Bitcoin, some rules are flexible, and other rules are, like, if you go 1 bit over this limit, you have created an alternate chain, essentially. And so I tell people a hard fork can be as small as a comma in the wrong place, but a soft fork can be massive, deep fundamental change to what is actually occurring in the calculation of like what is Bitcoin. Because one of the things that is happening in validation, so you find like a validating node, its job is to check, are all these signatures valid? Are there any double spends? Is there an attempt at theft occurring in this block? But one of the other things that they're checking is does everything in here follow all of the rules? And the rules are things like total coin supply. Like, did this block contain Bitcoins that it shouldn't contain because this miner is trying to add inflation for their own benefit? Like, that would be a thing that would instantly be alarm bells everywhere and like be orphaned in 99.69's versions of reality. That would just be the end of it. And so what soft forking does is you're essentially taking a whole lot of code that takes your change that would cause a hard fork. You're breaking change. A rule has been broken with your change, and you have stuffed it into an envelope. And the envelope says, don't break the network. Don't validate the rules inside of here. Don't worry about it. Just validate this as soft fork rule. Now, that's a very oversimplified version of what's happening, but it's practically what's happening. It is the sum total of what actually occurs. So a soft fork creates a dependency in the network where when a legacy node, so let's say I have not updated my node to even know what that soft fork rule is, well, why doesn't my old node reject that new rule? Like, Bitcoin shouldn't have a new rule. A new rule means a broken rule. So shouldn't my legacy node reject whatever's in that block? And the answer is yes, it should. And the fact that it does not is because what a soft fork rule is saying is you're not allowed to look inside this envelope, legacy node. Just trust us. Just trust the new node version, because new node is good node. And like, to me, like, I remember the first time, for me, the first big one was RBF, replaced by fee. Yeah. And I'm like, just instantly like, well, this completely eliminates Bitcoin's usefulness as in-person money. I need to wait for 6 blocks. I mean, at minimum, I need to wait for 1 block, and that's 10 minutes. And if I'm buying a cheeseburger, we're already done. Like, it's just, I can't, well, here, let me pay you in Bitcoin, but I'm going to stand here for 10 minutes over a $10 purchase, like, I'm an idiot in that scenario. And it's because of RBF, which had all the technocrats talking technobabble about why this is good for Bitcoin. And I'm saying, even if it was good in some way, the way that it's put through is really scary, because maybe everybody loves RBF. Maybe RBF is a good thing. But in a few years, what if really terrible thing is really popular thing? And I have no practical way to resist it. I can't even run rules of the network that say, no, I reject dumb thing. I just lose because, well, it's a soft fork. We wouldn't want to risk splitting Bitcoin. And it's like, Bitcoin exists to split when you disagree with new thing.
Sure.
There shouldn't be new thing. Bitcoin is the thing. And if hard money can change, then it is soft money. And if it's soft money, if there is anybody who can change it, then you've immediately introduced the opportunity for political factions. And if you add political factions, you add lobbyists and people who have interest. And okay, well, if it can change, maybe I can change it to benefit me. And everybody will say, well, no, the Bitcoin community will never allow such a thing. I'd argue you allow it all the time. I'm the Bitcoin community, and I hate this thing that you've done. And I have zero practical response as a Bitcoiner to reject you. You tell me that I just don't get it. I'm not technical enough. I'm, all these other things. And actually, you can read recently Luke Jr., who's a guy who I don't particularly like, but he tweeted about the problem of Taproot. He didn't like Taproot and SegWit. He helped implement it because
he's the driving force behind SegWit and the soft fork.
Yes, but he explained that the problem with soft forks is exactly what I just said. If you don't upgrade to the very newest version of the node, you're just a light wallet. You can't validate the whole network. And if you can't validate the whole network, why are you validating anything at all? And he's right.
Sure, and I've read Mike Hearn's article on soft forks, and
it's a great piece.
Similar ideas as well. The elusiveness of the soft fork and the wordage of it.
Yeah.
But I guess, like I said, I'm not much of a technical person, and I just don't want to represent Bitcoin Core in any kind of technical way. I guess from my perspective, Bitcoin Core people who, appreciate what the developers have done, why are they just claiming that it's fine? SegWit happened, Taproot's here, ordinals are here.
Mm-hmm.
The answer is always, well, if you don't want to run that, you don't have to run it. You can still validate, the Bitcoin blockchain. Like, why is that not the case?
I guess more than anything, it's funny to me. It just comes across as like you were kind of this warrior in a revolutionary thing, but now you're just kind of like, it's like I have like a plastic gun on my hip because I want people to be like, hey, Kurt's carrying a gun. But like if I actually needed it, I'm like, uh-oh, it's a squirt gun, right? And that's my problem with it, is it's very, and I mean, just be honest about it. Like everything I said isn't necessarily good or bad and like a philosophical standpoint, but like people will tell me that I'm not telling the truth about it. And that's the part that I find very, very irritating. And it's what leads me to believe that, okay, if this is the thing we're not allowed to talk about, like, why? Like, what's being hidden beneath this? Because, like, I've pointed out why it could be corrupt.
Sure.
At least explain to me why it isn't. And then that's when well, you wouldn't get it, or stay in your lane, or you're just a shitcoiner. And then I'm like, guys, like, that's just, you're writing it off. You're being unfair to the question. And so it just bugs me.
Why is it not enough to have, the developers explaining, and, you have some of the brightest minds who are implementing these, BIPs and these changes? Why are we just like, I guess it's so hard for me I'm not a software engineer. I'm not someone who's developing an insane protocol like a Bitcoin protocol. I guess for me and for most people who are just looking to have the utility from Bitcoin, there's a lot of, it's not even like trust. I think it's just more like when you have experts who are developing and creating and, bringing in brilliance, and ideas. Why is all that, not enough? I guess it's just like, it's almost like it almost just seems like you're taking that credibility, and it's just like, no, it's not about that. I guess that's where I have a difficulty grasping it, is because then from my perspective, you're just someone telling me that BSV is actually it, and it's because it's not BTC,
Right. Well, first of all, I don't think I've said anything about BSV.
No, you haven't. And I'm just saying, like, as an example,
For sure.
Like if you had some BSV developers tell me why BSV is closed and perfect, and
right,
why do I believe that over like a BTC, a Bitcoin Core developer?
For sure. I think so. There's a couple of things there. I think the first thing is there's this presumption that the Bitcoin developers, that the guys that manage the core repo, are brilliant professional developers of some rapport. And it's like, well, some of them are, some are actually very genuinely talented software engineers, but Bitcoin isn't just a software project either. Like, Bitcoin is an economic system. And if Bitcoin is an economic system based on rule enforcement, and the rule enforcement and the economics of the system are the thing that makes it valuable, then I think that's the most important thing to protect. Like, you can implement all kinds of software that doesn't introduce breaking or non-breaking change. Like, there doesn't have to be, you can re-implement Bitcoin from scratch in JavaScript or Go or Rust, or maybe you even just do it in C++, but you just do it very different.
Sure.
Or differently. And, but that's not what's happening. What's happening is people are creating a very deep redefining of what a Bitcoin is at a fundamental and economic level, and telling you, well, you wouldn't get it because you don't get software. And that's really, really, and so that's like, people call this gaslighting if it's in other contexts.
Sure.
And saying, okay, first of all, I'm not an idiot, so don't talk to me like I'm a fool because I can't code in C++. There's very few people as a percentage of the culture that understand C++ as a programming language.
And those people are tend to be assholes when people ask them questions about it.
Well, they do. And here's the thing. It's a very different perspective. Like, a lot of people that program, like, C++ is like machine level coding. It's very, very powerful, low level language. And the kind of people that are good at that are typically people that are, I don't want to say typically because I don't know the math, but there's a higher occurrence of neurodivergent people that are good at that, for example. It's like people on the autism spectrum.
Sure.
And so autistic people are very, very interesting, especially the high functioning, like, math brain. Like, they really solve problems in very interesting ways. But what we know about the autistic people generally, like, the thing that makes them autistic is the fact that they don't really understand human relationships and the incentives that mold human interaction. And therefore, their view on economic incentives is going to be fundamentally skewed. They can have an academic understanding of it, but they can't have a deep personal understanding of it. So it's a little bit like talking to ChatGPT about, how do humans like money? Like, to them, that's a very, well, what does the textbook say? And instead of intuiting some visionary application where they could say, well, like, let's actually think about the game theory. Maybe I can create game theory that makes for better economics. Like, that's not something that an autistic person is going to be capable of doing unless they really, really focus on making that the one thing that they put tons of energy into. Because if they were good at it, they wouldn't be autistic. Like, the nature of being autistic is that you can't read other people's emotions and their social cues. And, like, that's what economics is. Like, economics is really hard to define, especially when we insert all kinds of weird variables and things that like, hey, now we're just in, like, Bitcoin is economic theory. Like, it's not even just like, well, yeah, we just get it. Everybody gets it. This is like a weird fringe theory we're working on. And so to then go to a software engineer and say, hey, we need you to make a software change, like, that's one thing. Like, that's what they're good at. But when they look at Bitcoin and say, why does Bitcoin not use an exponential curve to just make it cryptographically secure in perpetuity? Why wouldn't we make it a perfect system? It could have been designed to never be double spent, but Satoshi didn't do that. Satoshi made it that all the nodes are competing. Every node has a chance. If there are 10 nodes, you have a 1 in 10 chance of building a block. And like, to a cryptographer, that seems crazy. But to Satoshi, he looked at it and said, no, you need to compete. I want you people to compete to make a game out of the money. It needs to suck you in and make you say, I have to win, because that endears something very differently than some cryptographer saying, well, of course it works. It's perfect. It was programmed using this curve. And so therefore it's like, so all that to say that a change in Bitcoin that changes its economics or changes something fundamental about it, like SegWit, for example, like, you have Bitcoin is an unbroken chain of digital signatures. SegWit introduces an entire second Merkle tree, and the Merkle tree uses a new group of cryptographic logic to separate signatures out, replace it with hashed witness data that then references tree one from tree one to tree two to say, yeah, we know there's not a signature, but here's a hash that the other part of the new system saw the signature, so trust it. And like, that's crazy to me. Like, Satoshi in the white paper explained, like, a coin is an unbroken chain of digital signatures. Like, it's a thing. It's a very specific thing. That's not one of the nebulous things about Bitcoin. It was one that has a very clear 1 sentence long definition that the software guys in charge of Bitcoin Core said, well, but Satoshi, how could he know what we know at this point? And it's like, you can't change gold. Like, we can't agree to just change the atomic makeup of what is gold. If we could, it wouldn't be valuable. And that's the argument that I make about that kind of change.
So, kind of like, to put in a layman's term, you're speaking more on, philosophically, what is Bitcoin from the foundations that we have. It's not about these changes of software that could, maximize the security of it, from, like, let's say an engineer's perspective, to be like, this is why we did this, to make it more secure. You're just saying, no, philosophically, we are at a different point of what we define, X, Y, and Z, and of where this all originates with Bitcoin.
There's a lot of soft money in the world. Bitcoin claims to be hard money, like gold. But if Bitcoin is not hard money, then we need to agree, like, we need to acknowledge that it isn't, if it isn't. But having it be soft money while advocates and influencers and giant business entities and things are saying that it's hard money that never changes, like, that's just dishonest. And again, like, why can't we be honest? If everybody was like, oh, yeah, that's true. Bitcoin's whatever we say it is. And like, okay, I get, like, if that's the world we live in, like, that's okay. But this is, like I said, like, I don't like the politics of, well, what is a man? Like, well, there's a social definition to that, I guess. But there's also a scientific one. Like, there's a genetic definition for male. And like, those things can both exist. Like, they should both exist because they can both, like, those are true. There's a scientific definition for what is, like, male at a chromosomal level. But like, you can project as a woman and be a woman as much as you want. And like, both of those things can be okay. But like, we should just acknowledge that, like, you're genetically male and you do all these things as if you're a woman. And like, if we could have that conversation without, like, the right-wing people getting really, really wound up about, what is he saying? And then like the left-wing people are getting really wound up. Like both sides of that are sitting there cringing and saying, don't say it, Kurt. What's the next thing that's going to happen? And like what that indicates is that both sides are like super worried that they're wrong. and because it shouldn't trigger you. Like there should be like, okay, we have textbook definitions for all these things. And if we can agree that like this is the actual definition, then we can just move on. Like it doesn't have to be political. And the more that you act like something is what it isn't or isn't what it is, then it inserts all this opportunity for all this chaos. And maybe that's a good thing in the halls of a philosophy class. Like if you want to go to like a gender studies class at your school and like that's something that's really important to you, like cool, go do that. Spend your life doing that. Like enjoy your life. I hope that's awesome and fulfilling and all of those things. But if we're talking about hard money, if we're talking about that, like there's something fundamentally wrong with the way that the world does money today, and Bitcoin is a solution because it's hard money, then we need to own that. And I'm just an advocate for owning that, like as hard as possible. Own it completely. I mean, and if we're not going to do it, then like, why are there celebrity influencers about like what is Bitcoin? Like that is just weird rent seeking, and I wish people would just admit that too.
Well, we're not trying to be condescending, but where did you think it was going to go? Like, where did you think Bitcoin was going to go? Was it not going to be grabbed by the people with the money, the people who, you know, benefited from this other system? Are they not going to try to then get as much as they could out of it?
I did assume that it was going to happen. And I talked about the fact that it was going to happen. You can look at my old podcast material where I'm saying, guys, if we don't use it as money, if it's primarily an investment, it's going to open the door for people to regulate it as property instead of cash, or get the SEC to jump in and start saying everything's a security, which like is the world we're living in now. And the funny thing to me is I've been the one warning that this was a major risk, and people say, well, it's decentralized. That can't happen. And then
so is Ethereum, apparently.
Well, right. And then, you know, now we live in this world and I'm like, hey guys, all these things that I predicted were risks happened. And then the people are telling me, no, it didn't. And so I look at those people and say, okay, these are the people that conquered it. Like this is the Vichy France government, or this is the new ruler that's been installed by the coup d'etat, telling me, you know, I'm speaking like wrong think, right? Like I need to go to re-education camp and like get my laser eyes and like, dude, like Bitcoin's going to 100,000 and then it's going to 1 million and that's it, dude. Like 21 million versus everything. Like, you know, like that, like Kurt fall in line here. And it's like, no, I warned you this was going to happen. Then it happened. And then I point out that happened. And all of you people are telling me that it didn't happen, which makes me think like you're either fools, like you're all fools, or you're all malicious. And like, it just needs to be talked about. It deserves to be talked. Like Bitcoin matters. And so like people will tell me I like to you know, trash on BTC. And I say, no, like I'm still the only one defending it. Like, I think it deserves to be this. And everybody's just telling me that the things that I care about, the things that I've noticed happen, don't matter. Because, you know, and I get people say this all the time. Well, nobody messed with the supply. There's still 21 million Bitcoins, bro. Like, what? Like, why is it the only thing that matters? Like, there's still a finite number of all kinds of things in the universe, but like, what matters is that they're predictable in such a way that they are useful for all of the other stuff that they're useful for.
Well, yeah, totally. And I guess like because you had mentioned, you know, is either everyone a fool or is everyone malicious? And I think it's just like, it's really complex with things like this. I think people like, you know, like Michael Saylor and my boy Saifuddin, you know, even Andreas down the line, a lot of people, Nick Bhatia, right? You know, a lot of these guys speak of Bitcoin from like an investment perspective. You know, hodl, hold your keys, you know, hold on to your Bitcoin, stack those sats, you know, it's in the podcast name. A lot of these things are, you know, a different culture of Bitcoin that you see kind of like as Bitcoin becomes more mainstream. Now, I don't know if that's a matter of whether they're agent provocateurs or, whether that's just like the theories they came with once they were presented with what Bitcoin was, in their perspective. But with that being said, that doesn't mean you just blindly listen to the only thing. That's one thing about BTC that over the past year, been in here 3 years, over the past year, I'm trying to get more to just learning the software of it and how everything works from a technical perspective, because I truly do want to understand all these nuances and arguments. And I feel like I'm just not going to be able to unless I can have a better grasp of how that works myself. Because ultimately, I do think that the decision comes on the individual, on each person. And it's not a matter of one is right versus the other is wrong. I think it's more just a matter of Satoshi didn't tell us what to do with the block size. He didn't tell us what to do with a lot of things. And what's that done? Well, it's basically done what anything happens once the profit is gone. There's going to be sectarianism. There's going to be schisms. I see your perspective, of like a more fundamental perspective, very similar to the splitting of Islam, and where you have the Shiites, the smaller majority being the ones who are the Prophet's families, who are like, we need to keep the caliphate within Muhammad's family, within the bloodline, versus the Sunnis being the larger majority are like, no, we're going to democratically elect the next caliph for the caliphate. So I definitely, it has me spinning with like the moments of history that I find it similar. And that's why I just really been enjoying this conversation. I mentioned this to you when we were off air, and I want to mention it on air because I do think it is important. Not only is it important to think for yourself and develop your own argument, but it's also important to work with people. And it's important to get people and where they're coming from. And through this entire conversation and from my time researching your social media and what you present and speak on, I don't see you attacking me. I don't see you belittling me. I see you sitting here with me, and we've spent, close to an hour just having a civil conversation where I am intrigued by some of these observations. I am intrigued by some of these concerns because Bitcoin is just another thing, and it's a better answer than what we had before. But we should know, as people who like history, that there is no giant defining moment that's going to change something for good or worse. These are always going to be pragmatic problems that require pragmatic solutions. So I do think that your perspective of saying, 98% of everyone all says the same thing about BTC. Can I just have my moment to address my concerns with you?
Right.
So I'm saying this on air because I really do think it's important. I don't think that you're coming from a malicious perspective. I think that you're someone who has been watching this and speaking about this for a while. So I don't just see it as, oh, Kurt, the BSV guy. Oh, Kurt's lying about this. Kurt's lying about that. I definitely need to learn my own nuances on the technical side of it so that maybe down the line we can spar a little bit more philosophically and intellectually. But I really just wanted to have this conversation go the way that it's gone.
Cool.
So far,
I'm having fun. And I appreciate you acknowledging that. Like, we can, like, maybe I actually don't even know your opinion. Like, you didn't tell me how you feel about big blocks or small blocks. Like, you're just asking me questions.
I don't think I have an answer. Like, I just don't know enough. I'm still learning. I read Blocksize War.
Sure.
I thought it was a good synopsis of how everything went down. I do actually have some aspects about big blocks that I would, just like to hear your opinion on.
Sure.
But I don't know which way I lean because I find that the arguments for both cases tend to be similar. They're both trying to say that if we go this route, we'll keep transaction fees down, which is what we want, and we'll incentivize miners to mine these blocks, which is what we want.
Yep.
So I guess that's what's difficult for me because, yeah, fundamentally, I just don't have a strong enough conviction of why big block or why little block.
Okay.
So for my perspective, I guess I would say I'm small block because, I do hold BTC. I don't hold any BSV.
Yeah.
Maybe that changes, why not have, every perspective open and keep your eyes on everything. But I would say small block just because I guess to me there is ingenuity in SegWit and, layer 2. I see Lightning and some, things as almost like smart contracts, extensions to Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
And for now, I still do see a pretty strong argument as to BTC being good, being utilized. I mean, it's used every day. I don't know what the uptime is, but I don't think there's very much of a downtime.
Yeah.
I can't really point to many aspects where it's been compromised, and I don't think anyone can really. And I guess that's where it's like, I don't have a horse in the race, but I'm BTC because that's what I've learned and what I've gotten into, I guess.
Fair. So here's a historical perspective on it. So in 2010 and 2013, there were catastrophic bugs that took down the network and required rollbacks.
Yeah.
The 2013 one actually kind of breaks it's funny because people say all the time, like, well, dude, if you were to spin up a 2008 or a 2010 node client and sync it to, which chain would it sync to? It's like, it wouldn't sync to any of them. Like it would think Bitcoin died in 2013 because what happened there was a bug that basically split the network in half.
Yeah.
And that's all well and good. Bitcoin has a mechanism to fix this, and it's the longest chain with the most proof of work is Bitcoin, and the one that isn't dies at some point. But that was not the decision that was made. The bug was deemed too reprehensible to let the miners decide which is the right one, and the version with the shorter chain with less proof of work was deemed to be the good one, just simply because it hadn't been upgraded. So it was 7.9 versus 8.0 Bitcoin Core versions. And they literally made phone calls to a couple of mining operations to say, hey, bro, revert your software and mine this chain, please. And it was pretty controversial. You can still read the logs. You can see Gavin and Andreessen reminding everybody hey guys, you realize you're orphaning Bitcoin and arbitrarily being the decider as to what is Bitcoin outside of the Bitcoin rule set. That's a pretty dangerous precedent you're setting right there. And it was deemed well, yes, but it's the right decision, and maybe it was objectively the right decision, but it also introduces I'm a decision maker in this now, it creates that sort of ruling class of developers. I also think it's interesting, when people say, well, Bitcoin Core developers are great. And it's dude, they've broken the network completely a couple of times. And then, so badly that they had to literally call everybody on the network. Thank God it was 2013 and there just weren't that many people to call, but they literally had to say, hey guys, so, Bitcoin, this thing that's supposed to be absolutely battle hardened, can't be stopped by the governments of the world. Well, I broke it, and I'm asking you to just switch node implementations now and fix it. And break a deeply fundamental rule of the network because I called you and asked. So, so that to me, I look at that and say, okay, maybe that, is that objectively good or bad? Maybe the decision was the right decision to make.
I mean, it just brings up a bigger point.
It's a centralization. So when people get the, it's too decentralized, you can't stop Bitcoin. I'm dude, I can think of at least one time that you could stop Bitcoin with a phone call. And the fact that you can stop Bitcoin with a phone call introduces, could I stop it with a phone call now? Foundry is the biggest mining pool in the U.S., and then Ant Pool, like, is Chinese, but they've got offices in the U.S. and the U.K., and they've got a lot of jurisdiction. And so, like, look at it. Like, between those two pools, I don't know where they're at, but they're probably 50-ish% of the network. But sure, between those two pools. And so what if they received a multi-jurisdictional court order that said, guys, like, we're the proverbial phone call, switch to this version now? I mean, is Foundry's compliance department going to say, no, man, we're too decentralized to change? Or are they going to obey the court order? Or are they going to fight it in court? You know, whatever. Like, the fact of the matter is we don't know, and that there is precedent that you can change Bitcoin with a phone call. And so what does happen? So I just think, just to discuss the, Bitcoin is unchanging and unchangeable is like, it's false. And so, and every time you test it, like every time it passes the test, it gets more true, but every time it fails the test, it gets more false.
Sure.
And we're on a continuum in that regard. Like, in my opinion, Bitcoin has failed most of the tests that it's ever been thrown. Like, in my opinion, every time that there's a fundamental change, like a thing like RBF or P2SH or the addition of CLTV or the addition of SegWit or the addition of Taproot, these are failures to resist some political change. And like, again, this is like the liberal versus conservative argument. Like, you have the, I'll bring up the trans rights things again. To that community, it's like, we have always lived in hell, and we are not safe until we have all of these rights dealt with as a trans community. And like, maybe, but then you got the people on, the conservatives in the situation say, this country was better before, some nebulous before, right? Like, when? 1500, 1600, like 1978, like what? When was the before that was great? And, and so again, like it's politics, and that's fine. Like, I like politics, I like political discussion, but if we're talking about hard money, again, like, hard money is not supposed to be political. Like, gold is the same. Like, I could take a handful of gold and hop in a time machine and go back literally 5,000 years to a culture that I don't speak the language, don't know anything about their culture, and like, there's gold in my hand, and they're gonna say, this guy's gotta be a king or something, like,
look at the shiny rock.
Right? And like, so there's like, that's important. And so, like, we need to build that provenance. Like, if Bitcoin is going to be gold, or if it's going to be the global settlement asset or the base layer of global economics for the next 1,000 years, like, we got to stop changing it every couple of months. So like, that's a really crucial first step to actually having that conversation with any integrity.
No, totally. I mean, we're 5-6 years into SegWit, and very, like, it was, from what I understand, it was wrapped together that once you have SegWit, you're then going to pave the way for Lightning, and it's going to solve our scaling issues. That was 5-6 years ago, and we're still dealing with the scaling issue.
Yep.
Exactly. Those are some of the points that I do think you raise good concern, because why would you just so blindly follow something and follow the narrative? Like, I guess that aspect has to do more with just like the psychological groupthink,
Yep.
People were wrong about, Bitcoin until they thought they were right. And now, we all think we're right, and there's this one answer. Well, from my perspective of history, that leaves a very big open wound that could potentially be exposed. And in my opinion, it's just always better to strengthen the argument, and that has to be done through difficult conversations like this.
And so I want to applaud you for that statement too, because I've always agreed with that. Like, I've been in so many groups. Like, I used to be in like the Reddit forums and all this stuff. I didn't use my real name. I started using my real name in Bitcoin stuff in 2017. But prior to that, I was very like, I'm going to stay pretty anonymous. I don't want to be the idiot who thinks some crazy thing, and then like that's part of my reputation forever. So I had like a learning phase where I was gonna be an anonymous guy. And then once I felt like I had a grasp on the technology, I'm like, okay, now I'm going to use my name and I'll advocate for something with my identity.
Mm-hmm.
And the funny thing is, I've always said, so I used to work in cybersecurity. I was a penetration tester. And
that sounds super sexual.
That's you haven't been tested till I've tested you. But but what the goal is I'm basically simulating a malicious actor.
Sure.
I'm trying to rob you. And that's what the company is paying me to do. So we'd get hired by like a bank or a hedge fund or, you know, some big business that has some compliance issue that, hey, twice a year we have to see if we pass the test. Like, do you rob us every 6 months, you know? And Bitcoin should be the same way. Bitcoin should be like, it should always be in the crucible of not just ideas. Like the ideas are good. Like that's where things start, but also like it needs to pass some of these tests. It needs to pass attacks, like technical attacks and economic attacks and rhetorical attacks. And you get all these people in like these private Reddit groups and on Bitcoin Talk and stuff like, dude, you need to be willing to die for Bitcoin. It's like, no, you need to see if Bitcoin's willing to die for you, because then Bitcoin's actually valuable. Like if Bitcoin falls over every time you blow on it too hard, like you probably shouldn't build the global economy on top of it. Like that would be a very, very bad thing if it cannot deal with a pressure test. And so it's weird to me that you got this like coddle culture in the closet, and then you've got this like super alpha Chad nonsense in public. Like, dude, Bitcoin can't ever change. Like we're like, all we do is eat red meat and all this other stuff, you know, that is like, dude, I've seen you in the private place. Just like, oh God, I hope people don't find out about this. You know, like there's this 0-day exploit, you know, like this kind of thing. And it's, again, like you can like even proof of work, like the proof of work ethos is like you either win or die like every 10 minutes. Like that's what the mining business is, dude, if you miscalculate a little bit and just for too long, like you die. That's what's at stake. Like, so that's how Bitcoin is asking you to treat it. And so everybody's saying like, hey man, publicly, we got to be, you know, like just don't ever bring up, like, it's like weird mafia stuff. You know,
sure.
It's a little bit like, hey man, you don't ever talk about the family, right?
Right.
And like, yeah, I understand why you want to build a mob family that way, that like we convey nothing but strength even when we're weak. Like that has all kinds of practical benefits, and it's great, and it's super dishonest. So, and like we need to be honest with it if it's going to do the things that it's supposed to do. Like I don't want Bitcoin to win if it can't deal with like mean things being said about it on Twitter. If it can't deal with that, we can't build the global economy on it. And I want to build the global economy on it. Like I'm an advocate for that. I want it to survive as much nonsense as you can throw at it. If I can't kill it with fire, and I can't kill it with rhetoric, and I can't kill it by trying to hack it, and I can't kill it by social engineering you and lying about it and all, like if it just persists, well shoot, like now we've got something, and that's great.
Definitely. I mean, I just don't know if anything ever will be able to live up to that standard. Why global currency? Why not just Bitcoin and a bunch of other things? You know, I find that would be one potential downfall in my perspective, is like, I don't need everyone to use Bitcoin. I just need it to work. Like, sure. Why do we want it to be a global finance?
So it's a few things. I think, I mean, it's like a political worldview. Like why, you know, I've brought up like Christianity, and you've mentioned Islam and some of these things, and like, why should we do missions work? Like why should we share anything? Why should, you know, if you think of us, like humanity, like collective of humanity as like a giant brain, like we're the collective intelligence of everything before and everything of now. Like, why should we talk? Why should we be friends? Why should we go to a bar and share a beer and like tell personal stories? Like, if there's something valuable about our ability to interact, then there's something valuable about our way to interact economically. And if we can interact economically and do it really well, then I think there's more value there. So it's an axiom that I came up with because it sounds good on a podcast, but I've always said Bitcoin wins when I can do business just as easily with somebody in South Carolina as I can in South Korea. Like if it causes me zero logistical difference,
Right.
Someone's like, oh, by the way, I'm in Seoul. And I say, okay, like you're paid. Like we just did business. Mm-hmm. Like there's a lot of value to that. There's a lot to unlock there. And it also makes me think of when I was a kid, one of my favorite movies was The Cable Guy.
Yeah.
And him
such a good movie.
And him talking about, it's funny because it's a comedy, but it's also like a horror movie, and it's like all these other things. But it's actually like it's a really seminal movie about like life in the data culture. Like for him, it was cable. It was cable TV. But when he's explaining it, he's standing on the satellite and he's explaining to, Steven, and he's giving this like, yeah, you can play Mortal Kombat with a friend in Vietnam. And the first time I heard that, I must have been, I was 10 or maybe less. Mm. And I'm thinking like, how the hell could I play Mortal Kombat with someone in Vietnam? Like, what does that even mean? Like, I knew what Mortal Kombat was and I knew what Vietnam was, but how do those, like, what is it? Like, can I go use the satellite? Like, what crazy thing do I need to do to play Mortal Kombat with a friend in Vietnam? But we live in that world now. Like, I can literally go play Mortal Kombat trivially with somebody in Vietnam today because of like the stuff that we created. Now imagine if you could take all of the things that are great about the internet and you can take away all the things that are bad about the way the internet is structured. Like Andreas Antonopoulos called Bitcoin the internet of money. Yeah. And the reason he called it that is because it's a protocol that's been missing in the internet stack. The internet was actually designed. A lot of people don't realize a 402 error. You'll often see a 404, like, hey, where's my website? 402 error, if you can find one, is payment protocol missing. Mm-hmm. The internet stack has an open space for a payments protocol because the people that built it, a generation ago now, said, well, obviously you'd want to have an internet that interoperates, or a money that interoperates with the internet. Sure. And so I look at that and I say, you know what? The thing that made the Catholic Church not scary 500 years ago. 500 years ago, you could be like physically punished for not going to church on Sunday. And then all of a sudden the printing press was invented. And then it became very easy for people to read. And then it became very easy for people to read something that wasn't the Bible. And then all of a sudden you get this revolution of people who are like, maybe I can do whatever I want. and people were stopping me from knowing that I could do whatever I want. And then within a generation, now you see commercials on TV. They're like, Catholics come home. Like, hey, wouldn't you like to come? We do a lot of fun stuff here at the Catholic Church. And like, it became voluntary. So the church went to like, all right, time to the wall. We're going to throw some stuff at them and make them feel like physically punished for not coming to church. And now they're begging me to be a member. Yeah. And it was just because information, the friction of information went from like way up here and it just went, everyone can get a book. You can get a book for free. There's books right here on the shelf. Like there's books everywhere. Like people ignore them. Not like, about books. Why are books interesting, Mm. And like Bitcoin's that same thing. Like Bitcoin is one of those major things in history that said like, hey, all this friction of doing business, like you got to fill out these forms and here's your wire information and your KYC and all this other, like you can't do business with somebody in Vietnam to, our kids. Like how cool would it be if it was just like, oh, I just started a business in another country and I'm 12. And and all these other things that you can do, like that's super liberating. This is when human experience goes exponential. Yeah. Super important.
Dude, yeah. No, 100%. I wanna ask you a hard question. Hopefully it's hard. I'm sure you've had this asked before. Jihan Wu, Bitmain, mm-hmm. Coinbase, these were all big blockers Bitmain, I think, put $900 million into Bitcoin Cash and supporting big blocks.
Yep.
You speak of big blocks versus small blocks. You've mentioned that from the smaller block perspective, there was a financial incentive from certain groups and people who were looking to change Bitcoin and get something else out of it. What's not to say the same perspective from big blocks when you have companies like Bitmain supporting and pushing and, secretly and openly advocating for?
Sure. So I think it's important to point out that it was mostly open. Nobody from the era was surprised to hear that, wait, Jihan's paying for, he was literally like, I really like Bitcoin Cash. I think that that's an important thing.
Yeah, he took over the company. He's like, I'm CEO now. This is
right.
What we're doing.
Dude, the Bitmain coup, I know people that were meeting with Zahn and they thought they were doing a deal with Bitmain, so they had dinner with Jihan. And then when that was done, the handlers were like, well, now you must go meet Zahn, the CEO of Bitmain. Wait, didn't we just make a deal? It's like, you've made half the deal. This kind of crazy Bitmain stuff from that era. Mm-hmm. But so same with Coinbase. So Coinbase and Bitmain and a bunch of others, they signed the New York agreement. Mm-hmm. They created it to make a public announcement of, this is what we believe and why we believe it about Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. And we want everybody to participate in the conversation and all these other things. And I think that's the right way to go about, not being a bunch of seedy lizard people. And I'm going to explain why I use the word lizard people in a minute. On the other side, you had Blockstream and Lightning Labs and a bunch of these other people that were legit being funded by New York Life Insurance and MasterCard Ventures and CME and AXA Group and all these old world finance companies. So I think is another important distinction. Bitmain and Bitcoin.com and Coinbase are Bitcoin people that had Bitcoin ideas. And the small blockers who claimed to be the real arbiters of Bitcoin ideas were literally getting old world, old world financial titan money to do whatever it is they were doing, which in my opinion is a clear conflict of interest. And so the reason I bring up lizard people is that was a meme at the time, and they literally turned it there are official Blockstream photos of lizards taking customer service calls. And I've shared it a couple times on Twitter, and people are like, dude, you photoshopped that. I'm like, dude, it is from Blockstream. They're gooning on you. And so, 100% there was corporate backing. But the fascinating thing to me is that small blockers framed it as that the big block version was the corporate takeover attempt of Bitcoin. To point at Coinbase and say, oh, they're the shady corporate people while receiving money from MasterCard and New York Life and AXA, some of the biggest insurance company, literally the biggest payments company, the biggest insurance company, and the biggest mercantile, CME is Chicago Mercantile Exchange, so the biggest commodities house in the world. And so, it's an amazing study in propaganda, frankly. How did they win that narrative war? How did everybody not say, hey man, Coinbase might be the good guys in this, and MasterCard should probably be we should double check why they're involved.
Well, how openly was all that known? I never saw any, obviously I wasn't into Bitcoin then, but I just never saw any even hint of a legacy company supporting or even openly speaking of this.
A lot of it is super scrubbed now. Mm-hmm. You go look for, I have old links that I keep in files, and you go click them and it's 404 error, this doesn't exist anymore. We have erased the history. And it's super effective. And funny because by its nature, the majority of people involved in the Bitcoin space are new, because most people get involved when there's a bull market. And so most people that think they're Bitcoin people are new. They don't remember the last cycle. They don't remember it's like talking to your grandparents about hey, what was World War II like? It's while I was 12 and they shot my dad. And then I lived in, like, I was a refugee for 6 years. And then I ended up now I'm in this cold city in America, sorry. And like, that's all, like, that's a paragraph. But if you lived it, it was 13 years from the time that the Nazis killed my family to the time that I was finally like in a place that ended up being my permanent home again, and it's, when you create distance from it and you act like, it didn't happen, it's fine. Like, it just goes away. Especially with like the news cycle and like, especially in the Bitcoin, like our whole news, like our global news cycle has become so like ADD chaotic. And then like Bitcoin's even worse. Like, it's literally the worst of it is like, information that's 3 weeks old is like, oh yeah, do we remember when that happened? Like, just, it's ridiculous. But it was a conversation. So there was the split of the R Bitcoin and RBTC subreddits. So a bunch of people got kicked out of R Bitcoin talking about big blocks. So the moderators over there were like, hey, big block conversations are not Bitcoin conversations. Get out. Which like already is like, it's a little nefarious. And then like the RBTC sub still has kind of a lot of this stuff, but a lot of it's been scrubbed there too. But they were having like the MasterCard debate. Like, I didn't discover this. I wasn't like the investigative journalist that blew up, I'm not, what's his face? The guy that blew up Watergate for the Washington Post.
Sure.
It's going to come to me after I leave. Woodward, Bob Woodward. So he, there was like a 2.5 year period where like Bob Woodward is definitely a scammer conspiracy theorist. And then like end of year 3, Nixon's like, I resign, I'm out. And it's like, oh, Bob was right. And it's the same thing over here. It's that, Kurt, you're a conspiracy theorist. And it's like, I didn't come up with this. Like, this was like, I remember it happening and I just started talking. Like, I just didn't stop talking about it because it always like ticked me off that everybody just acted like it didn't matter. So, all that to say, when you ask why don't I remember that? Why isn't there more evidence of that existing? I think itself is at least plausibly evidence as to why it was nefarious.
Sure.
Like, it's bad PR that, hey, we raised $40 million in 2014 to create Blockstream and our lead investor was AXA Insurance. Like, who wants to hear that? And so you bring it up and like the response is you roll your eyes and call him a scammer.
Sure.
Or you're out.
Yeah, I mean, like, obviously DCG is super concerning. Having pubco mining operations, in my opinion, is super concerning. Anything that's trying to, whether it's on purpose or just by how it's going about, anything that's trying to take Bitcoin away from the regular day person is just like immediately something that kind of like raises my eyebrow or alarms me. That's where this is all so intriguing and apparently taboo.
Yep.
And like the real big thing that I want to take away from this, and I want people who are into Bitcoin and whatever kind of version or whatever technology in general, whatever it is that you're fighting for, that or that you believe in or that you're interested in, try to remember that the statement "history repeats itself" isn't something, one, to be taken lightly, or two, something that will disappear and go away. Like, no matter what the case is, everything that's happening is happening because humans are involved. That means that there's going to be a lot of different objectives, a lot of different perspectives, and I just would find it so disheartening and extremely tragic for people who are supporters of Bitcoin to not look at BTC and just have some sort of a debate with themselves. Why am I still here? Why do I still believe this? Is it just the money that you've accumulated through it? Is it really because you believe it's immovable? Well, like, let's strengthen our arguments. Like, part of what I wanted to do today was not try to tell you all these reasons why I think differently, but to walk it with you, because
Yeah.
I find the best way to create something stronger is to steel man something together.
Yeah.
Whether I believe in it or not, like, I need to hear the best version of your answers, because we need everyone to hear it so that everyone can then decide for themselves.
Mhm.
This isn't about finding what's right or wrong. I know you say this is the truth, and it's about uncovering the truth, and history is about uncovering the truth, and conversations like this are about uncovering the truth. So I just want, everyone to be mindful that I don't have an objective in changing anyone's viewpoints in life. Bitcoin didn't come to me because people shoved it down my throat until I understood. The things that I learn in life are learned through life experience and through my lived experience. And that's what I want people to take from this. Like,
Sure.
I just want people to hear all of it. I want people to hear where you're coming from. I want people to hear where I'm coming from. I want everyone to have a say. And it's way easier to do this one-on-one, you and I,
Yeah.
than for me to hop into a Telegram group or to hop into a subreddit
Yeah.
and try to go through this conversation, because frankly, people are just difficult and very strong opinionated. And like you said, a lot of people just don't want to be tested and find out that they're wrong, or that
Sure.
something that they believed in wasn't actually, what they believed in.
No, it's crucial. I think one of the things as a rhetoricist is like epistemological self-consciousness, which is like a really long way of saying, like, you understand why you believe what you believe. So like enough to advocate for your own worldview, which is why, again, at the beginning, like I want to pressure test ideas. Like if an idea is a good idea, I shouldn't care who rips it apart. If I actually believe what I believe, and I believe that it is valuable, even if it's unpopular, then I should want more people to try to disassemble it. Because in the act of disassembling it, maybe they'll understand why that it's valuable, and then they will become an ally. And so if the sum total of people watching this interview is, that Kirk guy seems a little shifty, I better go read what Satoshi said about everything.
Yeah.
Or go look at the history of, like, wait, did Henri de Castries decide to invest in Blockstream for nefarious reasons in 2014? The CEO of AXA Insurance at the time. Like, look into that. What did Henri de Castries did? Is Henri de Castries an interesting? Is he a person who has deep opinions about the direction of money and capital in the world? If he isn't, if he's just this innocuous guy who was like a CEO at some tech company before, and he was a CEO at AXA for a couple of years because it just was part of his career path, then like maybe there's nothing there. But what does he believe? Is he a monetary activist of some stripe? Like, go look into that. I hope people look into that. Who is that guy? Why did his company lead investment in this company called Blockstream? And what is Blockstream's objective? Have you read Blockstream's site? Have you looked at what level of contribution have Blockstream employees put into the Bitcoin Core GitHub repo? They're not every developer. In fact, they're not even a majority of developers. So you could break that down by a metric and say, Blockstream's not even that influential. Or you could look at it and say, but who are the influential people in the, like, sure, 1,000 people might contribute some code, but who's contributing the most code? Like maybe one big push into the repo is 30% of all the code that ever existed in Bitcoin. And so there's stuff like that. Like you need to like dig into it. So if that's the sum total of people watching this interview and both of us making them feel like a little uncomfortable about how much they do or don't know about Bitcoin,
Sure.
Awesome. Everybody got more educated.
Yeah.
This is the DYOR, bro. When you go do your own research. You should.
I really like, I just want to keep stating it. Like, I'm not saying I have an answer here, but I think something really fascinating, interesting is reading Mike Hearn's emails with Satoshi, because Mike Hearn he represents what you were saying earlier, where he was someone who was extremely fascinated in Bitcoin from the beginning. So what did he do? Well, he just emailed Satoshi and asked him questions, and their back and forth is incredible. I even think there's some things I see Satoshi talking about where he might even be alluding to something like segregated witness. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff, just like from being here now and then looking back.
Sure.
I think there's a lot of really good stuff just in general. Like, Satoshi is pretty clear about the things he's clear about.
Yeah.
He doesn't like politicize you. He just tells you why it is that way. And like, that's kind of like where I've learned that the 21 million is just a number that he picked. He could have picked many other numbers. He picked 21 million. He tells Mike Hearns, not really about that. It's about all these other things.
Yep.
Just reading the white paper, obviously it's like we should all know the white paper pretty well, as it's like the first document that we have in all of this. So what your perspective made me do, and I'll be honest, in a beginning egotistical sense of like, well, Kurt is wrong, and I just need to actually research a bit, because then I'll prove that he's wrong.
Yeah.
To just know, now I'm like deeper in the rabbit hole than ever before.
Yeah.
Like, now I understand why I need to know more about how computers work and how programs work, because I just need to have a better understanding of all this. And ultimately, that's where we all want to go if we're really into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
There shouldn't be a stopping point to how much you learn about Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is the world and the existence of everything.
Yeah.
It's every single industry in the world is tied to Bitcoin. It's finance, it's game theory, it's computer science, it's literally everything. Yeah. So there isn't a point in your life where you learn about Bitcoin and you should stop learning. No, the whole point of Bitcoin is that you always want to learn. You always want to test yourself. You always want to build on top of what you know. So ironically, from me, hearing about you and watching, you and listening to some of your arguments, it kind of just made me look at myself and be like, Plamenko, you're very new in all of this. Spend some more time learning, because there's people who have just a longer length of the time that they had to learn all this. So just go back and spend some more time learning, which, whether it was gonna, happen on purpose or not, it was just, you definitely contributed to just me wanting to know more about Bitcoin and polish my understanding of things that I didn't know about.
It's great.
And yeah, I don't even want to go into the rabbit hole of Craig Wright.
I will. I'm happy to.
Definitely. I do want to, I don't know how much you're able to talk about the documentary.
A little bit. Like, I can't talk like distribution companies or the release date and that kind of thing. But what I can tell you is, so I'm consulting it. I believe I'll get some kind of writing and or producing credit in helping flesh out like what is the whole story. But how do we also make it like 2 hours long and have it be digestible? Because like, you could talk for 6 hours about like all of the predicate problems with money and culture and computers and all these other things that are like, some people might say, well, you can't even understand Bitcoin unless you understand this. But
right.
So how do we talk about the history of Bitcoin and a lot of like the questions that I raise in such a way that people understand why they're questions that are worth raising about Bitcoin, and then also tell Craig's story and how Craig is interwoven into the Bitcoin space. And so full disclosure, I do believe Craig is Satoshi Nakamoto, which is, right there, the most controversial thing you can say in Bitcoin, period.
Of course.
Like that's like a bunch of people just hit the ceiling like, oh, this guy. But
they're like, I'm going to kill Plamenko. What is he doing?
But, Yeah, some people will, frankly. So, and it's like curious to me why, like, hey man, so it's okay to disagree.
Right.
But yeah, so like Craig is all these fascinating things. And he's also super complicated. And like, I agree that a lot of the stuff about Craig's life doesn't add up. And what I think is funny about it is that people assumed that this pseudonymous figure who is undermining like the most powerful and rich people and things in the history of the planet would just have some squeaky clean like version of what his story is, and that it would just all wrap up in a perfect little bow that made everybody feel like, oh, well, that's all very easy, and that would be the case. So like I always expected Satoshi, if he ever resurfaced, to be like a really weird character and have really complicated backstory issues, and like, why did you disappear, and why did you create it in the first place? Like, what is the context for all of this stuff? And so Craig hits the scene publicly in 2015 and 16 were like the big years for the Craig Wright story.
That's when Gavin, goes out and says, I spent time with Craig.
I met Satoshi.
Believer.
Yeah. And so, and now we look at that in context, and like, it was like 2 months ago, there's a bunch of people bullying Gavin, like, you need to rescind what you said. And like, there's just like these witch hunt campaigns about like, hey man, everybody must distance themselves from Craig. And first of all, that indicates something political about that. Like, if he was just a fool and his ideas fell apart on first glance, like, there's a lot of those people in the world. I don't care what they're doing. And so for some reason, Craig's ideas are very dangerous and must be stomped out and must be shunned. And, so that is an indicator of something. I'm not even going to prognosticate what. But when we look at Craig's life, like the actual things that we know happened in Craig's life, so the fact that he owned, a government contractor cybersecurity pen testing firm, or a cyber forensics firm that got hired by military intelligence by the UK and Australian governments, like what do you presume the history looks like of the kind of person that is given military intelligence cybersecurity work? Like, do we assume they just have like a bank account at Chase Bank and like, they just live their lives in such a way where they can be like, well, of course I can give an attestation of where I was at every moment of every day, and like, hey, this is crystal clear, and like, of course none of my emails are forged, or all these other things. So like, when it comes down to this, like, oh well, that email was forged and this was backdated and all that, and it's like, okay, when you work for intelligence agencies, and just like your presumption, like, what are people's base presumptions about like what a CIA agent's life looks like? And then imagine that part of working in that, like, and again, this is not contended or contentious history of Craig. Like, we know this is what Craig was up to in the era directly preceding Bitcoin, is that he was hunting human traffickers and hunting gun runners and hunting basically terrorist organizations in conjunction with military intelligence agencies of some of the most powerful nations in the world, which means he was digesting their data and repurposing it. Or that he was helping Lassiter's Casino, which was like the biggest casino in the Eastern Hemisphere, like figure out how to get offshore payments in such a way that was low friction and allowed people to make payments that were instantly guaranteed, but also easy to send in, and all these other things. Or that he, transferred hundreds or thousands of patents in that era from his company that he started in the early 2000s and transferred them into we have patent applications about blockchain. So here's an indicator. Nchain, his big company that holds all these patents, is a holder of some of these patents that come from De Morgan, which was his company before the Bitcoin era. And so if Nchain is holding Bitcoin-related patents that were De Morgan created, and De Morgan was a company that was shut down in 2012 or 13 and had years of patent portfolio stuff about blockchain technology that precedes Bitcoin, like right there, we're looking at hey guys, the file date on this is very old. Like these are all little predicate pieces of technology that as he was creating them was saying, I should probably like, I'm gonna file this away and patent this. But I'm also working in payments and I'm working in cyber forensics and I'm working in fraud and accounting and all. Like he was an accountant, like a forensic accountant for BDO, which was a major auditing firm. And so like all of these things that come together. And so for me, like all of the weird stuff about Craig, like all your typical like Arthur Van Pelt kind of articles about all the reasons he's a fraud because here's the wrong thing, here's where he screwed up the checksums, here's where he screwed up the like all of this stuff. For me, it's like prove to me that he was not doing cyber forensics and cybersecurity for intelligence agencies for those countries, because everything else to me is irrelevant. Like there are very weird protocols that are not publicly known for how data needs to be used and digested and secured and destroyed if it had anything to do with part of an operation or part of operations that would be illegal if they were exposed. But it's okay because we got like the Queen signed off on, we have to do this because we're trying to take down this terrorist cell or whatever, you know? And so start there. Prove Craig didn't do that. And then we can talk about like, why are all of his documents so fishy? Because fishy documents are exactly what I would expect from somebody in that situation who built Bitcoin and then tried to disappear and then got his email hacked in 2014 and got his servers burned down because he was being blackmailed by the people that worked inside of his company. And then the tax office tried to basically kill him. And then he was outed by Wired and Gizmodo magazine. So he's just got this massive like, oh my God, all this crazy stuff I've been up to is about to come to my doorstep. And what does that look like? What comes to my doorstep? Is it the police? Is it another auditor? Is it an assassin? We don't know. So like you have ruined my entire life. Like remember, he left his home forever. He was very happy in Australia. Like he went and moved to London, like uprooted his family, like all these other things that like I know Craig personally and I know his family. Nothing matters to Craig more than his family. And so when I think about like what he's had to put his family through, and like when he talks, like even in passing, he'll bring up that era, like, cause I need to ask him when we're working on things like the documentary, and like, he can't even talk about it. When he talks about like, well, and then this is what they said to my wife. Like you see it break him. I've seen him cry in court. Like he can't talk about his wife or his kids without being right there on the verge of those tears because of what he had to go through, because of what all of that turned into. And so is Craig Satoshi is like, I can't give you an answer that's a sentence long. It says, here, it's crystal clear. But I never expected it to be. And nobody should have expected it to be. And so working on this documentary to like tell that whole story in such a way that makes people feel like he is or isn't, and that isn't the point of the documentary for what it's worth. And we're not trying to convince people like, this isn't like, it's not titled Craig Wright is Satoshi Nakamoto. It's a story about what the process looked like and how Bitcoin became everything that it is and why it isn't what it isn't. And that the human part of it, like telling the story of this is the process, because it's fascinating. It's a crazy interesting story, and I'm super excited for people to see it.
Yeah. And that's going to be releasing on Netflix or?
I don't know where it's going to be released, but it will be shopped to one of the major streaming services.
Awesome. Do you have any kind of an idea when that's set to be released, or? It's like a long political kind of thing to get it to that point.
It should have been out already, actually. So the pandemic was a huge problem because part of the story is being told through the court cases as they happen. So it's like a predicate of the story is like, how does the story end? And a bunch of these court cases are related to, you know, what is the ending even going to be? We don't know what the end is. And so part of telling the story with those court cases means that we're a little bit contingent on them. And So it puts a little bit of a question mark on the exact distribution. Now it's written. There's, I don't even know, thousands of hours of content that's been filmed and all this stuff, but we're kind of waiting for these couple of things are just like on the whiteboard with got to happen first.
Sure. Well, whenever it does, you'll have to let me know. I'll definitely keep my eyes peeled and be watching that.
Sure.
Is there anything else you kind of wanted to address or say, like...
It's actually the last question I ask everybody when they're on my show.
Nice.
So, not really. I mean, I could talk about things like BSV and like why BSV. I think if this is the only interview with me that anybody ever watches and nobody ever like talks about why BSV as a Bitcoiner, for me, it's simply that Bitcoin as it was originally designed deserves to be tested. And it really isn't anything more than that for me. Like, it's not some deep political reason or some financial, I mean, obviously the financial aspect of like being a BSV holder has not like endeared me any extra wealth or personal credibility or any of these other things.
No, I mean, in fact, it's kind of the other way. Sorry.
Exactly, right. And so I always say, like, what scams look like years and years of a lot of financial and infrastructural investment to only make your reputation less popular. So, but for me, if Bitcoin mattered the way that it was implemented, and when it was implemented, like one of the things that Satoshi said to Mike Hearn was, we can scale past Visa today with existing hardware. And if you give me a little bit of time, I can show you how. And that sentence always stuck out to me and say, like, well, no blockchain has ever hit those numbers to this day. I mean, we're 14 years after he was this was a sentence that he said preceding the launch of Bitcoin. Nobody had seen it yet. And so I've always wondered what that meant. Like, where's the follow-up question, Mike?
Yeah, because not only that, but Satoshi gives a little bit of an answer as to how. I mean, from what I remember, that quote, he mentions, just the efficiency of computers will scale this.
Moore's law, right. He mentions a couple of those things. And then a little bit later in history, he talks about, like, very specifically, the way that Bitcoin runs today isn't how it should run in the future. Like, not everyone should run their own node. And then he says, does everybody run their own email server, basically? And, at the time, it was a lot more true than it is now. But he said, literally, it ends up in big data centers and specialized hardware. And he may have even mentioned GPU in that. He mentions GPU for sure in history, talking about scaling, but I think it's part of that quote, if I recall.
Yeah.
And so I look at that, and you'll get the people who want to, like, really drill into the fact that, like, well, BSV isn't exactly what the original implementation of Bitcoin looks like, and that's true. And I'll call back to something you said at the very beginning, or much earlier in this interview, is that, like, the thing that sprouts out of this civil war, like, it is imperfect. BSV is imperfect, and BTC is imperfect, and BCH, and there's a bunch of other communities that really care about whatever version of their Bitcoin that they really like. But that's the nature of surviving a civil war. Like, this country still has scars from the Civil War. And, like, you can, like, we're Northerners, right? So we're like, hey, man, we freed the slaves, and we won the Civil War. And, like, but you can go to a place in Alabama and you can talk to people. Like, here's another, like, my question before, how do they teach the Civil War in Alabama? It's a little bit different than how they teach it in Wisconsin.
A little bit different. Yeah.
And so, but it's funny because it's not inauthentic. Like, they're being, at the very least, they're being emotionally honest with how they feel about that occurrence.
Sure.
It's, like, I know Southerners who will call it the War of Northern Aggression.
To this day. A lot of people in the South feel that way with it.
And, as a young person from Illinois, I'm like, War of Northern Aggression? Weren't you guys the bad guys? And then you talk to them and you realize all these other, like, all the political stuff that went into the Civil War. And like we get the one paragraph version, like, well, they wanted to separate because they wanted to keep their slaves. And like, that's not false at all. Like, that is a truth about the Civil War. But it was also this really complicated list of other things.
I mean, yeah, when your entire economy is built on
Right.
slavery, slavery was very much the crux of the historical side of the Civil War, but there's a million reasons why Civil War happened.
You're also asking for the entire region to live through generations of depression after. And what do large portions of the South look like today?
I mean, the South is the poorest parts of America. I was just in Arkansas in January.
Yeah.
Never seen things like that in Bosnia. When I go to visit my war-torn country, that still has grenade shells in buildings, I didn't even see that level of poverty as what I saw in Arkansas in the South.
I've seen the same thing, like driving through places like Alabama and Georgia, and it's just like, wow, this is the country I live in. And it's like 20 states all in that region. And none of this is a criticism or an endorsement of any of that. It is just to say that there's a scar on us from that Civil War. And BSV is an imperfect version of Bitcoin, or an imperfect attempt at redrawing those borders the way that we wanted them, to do the most Bitcoin thing the way that we see it. And it's the same as saying, like, what is Germany? or what is Bosnia? Or what, any of these things.
Sure.
And it's like, well, that river used to be our river, and now it's their river because some treaty signed by some dudes before I was born. And that's the world we live in. And those are the scars of that Civil War. And so I'll finish by saying that not all truths are scientific, but they're still true. And BSV is that truth. It is this attempt. It's that saying, like, look, like, we can't erase the Civil War that we went through, but principally we're trying to apply all of the reasons why we fought it and why we continue to fight it, and why we think that continuing to fight it is what will give the most net good to the world. Like, it's not some affinity scam. If I just wanted dollars, like, there's a lot of communities that would have paid me a lot of money or given me a lot of tokens to be an advocate for, crap coin X.
Yeah, I was going to say poop coin. Glad we're on the same page.
And for me, it's like, it's a principle thing. And like, it doesn't mean, like, if you're interested in BSV, or if you want to use BSV, or if you want to try to use BSV, like nobody's going to say, like, did you sell all your BTC first? Like, these are not thresholds that need to be met. Like, you're allowed to spend like $10 and get a little BSV and see if you like using the tools on it, or if you have a business that would benefit from using the network in some way. Like, there's nothing stopping you from just seeing. Like, I use Ethereum sometimes for some things. I use other blockchains because I find some utility or some pleasure in using them, and that's okay. Like, we don't have to live in castles and just throw missiles at each other all the time.
Very well said. I appreciate you for, doing this with me, doing this interview in the way that we did. I tried, not to have too much personal attachment to all this. I know it's a little bit harder for you since this is what you talk about in your career. But yeah, again, I really do appreciate you trying to just walk me through this and give me like your best answers for these, questions that I think are some of the questions that need to be, brought to the front of the conversation when we are going to embark on as, mic dropping of a conversation as we have.
For sure.
It's been a pleasure, Kurt. Super happy to meet you. Thanks for coming on the podcast. And I promise you, I'll learn some of the more technical aspects of Bitcoin and BTC so we can come back and have a little bit more of like a technical spar.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it. And I really appreciate you having me. It's been great.
Is there anywhere that our audience can find you on social media or any links?
I am Kurt Wuckert Jr. everywhere. So I'm kurtwuckertjr.com. I'm Kurt Wuckert Jr. on Twitter and on Telegram and anywhere else. I answer all my DMs. I get a lot of them, so sometimes it takes me a little bit of time now. I do a weekly live Q&A podcast on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern time, the CoinGeek weekly live stream. So if you like heard something on this show and you wished it was being asked, like come ask in my troll box. Like I specifically like the hard questions and I like taking them live, and I just want everybody to know like it's about transparency and it's about being intellectually honest. And if I don't know, I'll frankly say I don't know. But yeah, I just want to facilitate better conversations and more education and just like also have a good time with people.
Yeah. Well, we can definitely align right there. Definitely feel the same way about it all. And I'll throw those links up in the video so people will have a way to reach you as well.
Awesome.
Once again, appreciate it, Kurt.
For sure.
Till next time.